Okay, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, where you are in the world. I'm happy to welcome you to our last online Hot Politics of the year. What started in March during the pandemic as a way for Gijs and myself to cope with Corona stress turned out to be a really nice way of having our lab meetings. Because we could now have a much broader pool of both speakers and people listening in. I'm happy you're here today on the last Friday of the month, which is a little earlier but because of the Christmas break now. We particularly open our virtual floor for graduate students from both our own group or our own university or from other places. And today we have a good mix. And we start with Maaike Homan, who will present a new project. So some of you have heard Maaike extensively talk about her facial mimicry, but now we'll talk about emotion recognition, right, Maaike? No, you're going to talk about facial mimicry?
No, for the very, very last time.
One more time. Oh, damn. I'm sorry. I've been on Zoom since 9 o'clock this morning, so I'm going to forgive myself. One more time, mimicry.
One more time.
Don't promise that. But Maaike, the floor is yours. We all know Maaike. Maaike is our PhD student interested in facial displays and will talk, has some really exciting results, I think.
Yes, I'm just sharing my screen now. Yes. Yeah, thank you all for joining on this last day for the Christmas break. Friday afternoon, but yeah, so this is the final and last time about this project. Probably I'll just do follow-up studies, but we got the final results now, so we wanted to present these. And this project is about, do we mimic politicians? And in this project, we really look at how people respond to the emotions of politicians. And I will mostly focus also on the physiological results of this project. So we know from, my project PhD also focuses just on general visual politics, and we know that a lot of voters use impressions of attractiveness and competence, these visual cues just as shortcuts, as heuristics, in their evaluations of politicians and other political behavior. And we don't really know that much about what happens when politicians show emotions. And we know that it might influence our evaluations, but we don't really actually know what really happens with our emotional reactions. So if a politician, which they do quite strategically, shows an emotion, does this also lead to a similar emotional reaction in us, or a different reaction, or how does that work? That's actually what we're looking at in this project. And so we base our project on two theories, or two theoretical frameworks. So on one side, the match-motor hypothesis, and this perspective basically says that this whole process of mimicry and emotional contagion is very automatic and just sort of a reflexive response. So when we see someone displaying emotion, for example, a smile or happiness, then we automatically also do this ourselves. So we also start smiling, start activating the same muscles in our face, and this gives a signal to our body, leading to us feeling the same way as we just observed in another person. And this whole process is known to increase liking of the person and perspective taking, understanding, etc. So that's why it's interesting to see whether this also happens when politicians are showing an emotion. But there's also an alternative perspective, namely emotional mimicry in social context model, which says that actually is dependent on the setting and the context. So it's not just happens all the time and it's automatic. It depends on who is showing the emotion. So you have two routes. Basically, the upper one says that when the person that's showing an emotion is someone from our in-group or someone we feel affiliated with, this will lead to congruent emotion and understanding and recognition, etc. But if this person is someone we don't have any affiliation with, someone from our outgroup, this would lead to sort of incongruent emotions, even reactive response. So, for example, in politics, it might be that a politician you would never support, you really sort of even might hate, and that person is showing, for example, anger, that you find this so ridiculous that you might laugh. So like the opposite reaction, instead of empathizing with that angry emotion. But with politics, it could also be the case that voters don't really connect with politicians that much, that they're too far away from us. So it's also actually a question whether we mimic them just in general. So when we look at more work in political science, we see sort of more support for this context model. So first of all, we see that when politicians express emotions, that this elicits also emotional reactions in voters, and this is also moderated by prior beliefs. So it depends on whether you support the politician or do not support the politician. But the findings are quite inconsistent. So sometimes this is for smiling, for happiness, sometimes it's for anger, sometimes it's not as clear. So we want to improve these studies and find a more sort of conclusive answer by improving our sample size, using a range of different politicians, and also using more controlled emotions, more controlled stimuli. So in this project, we have 4 hypotheses or 4 research questions. So first of all, do we mimic the emotions of politicians? Secondly, is this context, so in-party versus out-party politician, of importance? And then in some cases, people really feel this emotional attachment to a politician. So you want to see whether this emotional attachment also sort of enhances this mimicry or enhances this mimicry process, or whether when someone really feels negative about a politician, this sort of inhibits this mimicry process. So yeah, the stimuli. So we try to make them very controlled, and we did this by using pictures of the government website of the 13 political party leaders of the Netherlands in that time. And those pictures were all really the same. So all white backgrounds, all same angle, etc. And then we manipulated them to look happy with face app. This is a filter that you could use, which is very realistic. It's actually quite creepy as well. And then there was no angry filter, so we actually used this more psychological program, Psychomorph, in which you can really manipulate action units. So these are muscles in the face, and we specifically manipulated the muscles that are related to anger. And then the experiment itself, it was a lab experiment, and in this experiment we first asked people their demographics and some control variables, political knowledge, etc. And then we hooked them up to this physiological measurement, facial EMG. So this is what you can see on the picture. We tested the corrugator muscle and the zygomaticus muscle. And the corrugator is known to measure negative valence, frowning basically, and zygomaticus is known for smiling and positive valence. And so this experiment, we asked the participants, who would you vote for if there was now an election, or who would you never vote for if there was now an election? And that we used as in an out-party assignment. So for those politicians, they would see the emotional displays. And then we also asked for those parties or politicians the feeling thermometer to get this identification measure. So in the experiment itself, we had several elements. So we had 2 manipulation checks. And the first one were a couple positive and a couple negative pictures from the IAPS system set. And these were just to see whether indeed we capture this valence, so that people smile in response to positive pictures and frown in response to negative pictures. And then a second manipulation check, we wanted to see whether we also can capture the mimicry by including mimicry pictures from non-politicians, so just normal people displaying anger, happiness. And so that we could compare this effect with politicians and how much this aligns, or whether this effect is quite different. And so these politicians, where the pictures I just showed before, were shown for 8 seconds. And before that, we showed also a fixation screen, which we used as baseline. And this was all randomized, and we also had some fillers and some other tasks to keep make the experiment engaging. So then the results. So just very quickly for the manipulation checks, the negative and positive pictures indeed significantly elicited negative versus positive valence. So that was really great. really shows that our measurements indeed expect or doing what we expected it to do. Then for this mimicry pictures of non-politicians, we find mimicry basically. So if you look at the red bar, so the corrugator, you see high corrugator activity in the angry condition and really relaxed corrugator activity in the happy condition. Then if you look at the greenish one, is the zygomaticus, the smiling one, you see that it's compared to the neutral condition, the happy condition is high. But what we didn't expect to find is it also quite high during the angry condition. So yeah, you wouldn't expect people to smile in response to an angry face. But actually, looking back into the literature, this has happened quite a lot before. And they explain it as some sort of, that people tense up their cheek as well in response to negative stimuli. And it can also be some sort of grimace or smirking or however you want to call it in response to an angry or negative stimulus. And we also find this in the other angry conditions, also to politicians. So it's actually quite consistent. So looking at the politicians, we actually see a quite different pattern than in the mimicry pictures. So if you look again at the corrugator, so the red ones, you see that for the in-party, it's actually for all conditions, it's relaxed. So looking at an in-party politician in general makes you sort of happy. And we see that, again, the zygomaticus, the smiling, is quite high during the angry condition, but also quite high during the happy condition. But there's not really the same sort of pattern as you would expect with them compared to those mimicry pictures. Then if you look to in the out party, you see that overall the corrugator is really active. So looking at an out party really makes us frown. And then one thing that stands out is actually the angry condition. So the zygomaticus is the smiling response is again active, but it's really way stronger compared to the mimicry pictures, to the in-party. And this might suggest a sort of reactive response, which you can also see in the next slides. So on the right side, you see the angry condition. For the zygomaticus, you see a really high spike for the out party. So this might really suggest that we find it sort of ridiculous when we see an out party politician show anger. And on the left side, you really clearly see that, for example, in the happy condition, that the corrugator is really relaxed for the in party, whereas it's very active for the out party. So this is not really the mimicking, it's more like sort of a negative versus positive response of seeing someone we support and someone we really would never support. And if you look at the self-reports, so this also shows that this is more like an affective response. So in-party elicits a lot of self-reported happiness, and out-party a lot of self-reported anger. But if you do compare the conditions, so you see some sort of emotional contagion. So people report more anger in the angry condition and more happiness in the happy condition. But these effects are quite small, and in party, they're a little bit bigger than in the out party. So then for hypothesis 3 and 4, overall, we don't really find a clear effect of this identification or negative partisanship. There was one, we did like a range of analysis, and we have a lot of different dependent variables. And there was one analysis that turned out significant, in which identification in an angry condition led to a little bit less zygomaticus activity for the in party. But all the other analyses were all not significant. So it's really hard to say that that really has an effect. So we actually, we're rejecting this hypothesis. Then we thought it was interesting to look at the different politicians, because we have 13 politicians, different politicians. So we thought it might be interesting to see if some characteristics are of importance. And what we find is that male politicians elicit more frowning. So corrugator response compared to female politicians. I must say that there were only 2 female politicians, so it's not much to compare, but still a small effect that we found. And then also the left-wing politicians from a left-wing party were elicited less frowning and more smiling, which is, I think, also quite interesting. And just overall, we found very low correlations between self-reports and the corrugator response. and Sigmaticus response. So there was low alignment. But just to conclude, overall, we see sort of more an affective response in response to politicians and their emotions. And especially for the out party, we saw really big sort of reactive response when they look angry. So looking at these results, you wouldn't say that this is just an automatic process of mimicking. It's more support for this emotional mimicry and social context model, in which really depends on when we're looking at an in or out party politician. And overall, there isn't that much evidence based on this results for mimicry. It's probably more complex than that and more sort of effective response. And I'm also looking forward what you think about these results. And well, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Maaike, for this really interesting presentation. Well, there wasn't much new for me because we worked on the paper last Tuesday. So I'm not going to ask a question, and I'm hoping those participants who've been listening, 20 people from all over the world, please type your questions into the Q&A box, and I will read them out. We have until about 3:30 for Maaike, and then we'll switch screens to John.
Should I stop?
Maybe you have a question while we'll wait for answers to appear. Questions to appear, sorry.
There's a question.
Oh, there's one. Thanks. Great. 2 questions already. Super fast. Patrick Stewart wins the prize for the fastest comment of the day. Incredible work. Could the smile in response to anger/threat possibly be submissive behavior, e.g. signaling lack of threat?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because in this work also of the Dartmouth group, they say that this happiness is also sort of a form of affiliation and reassurance. Yeah, it could be that instead of if you're confronted with someone who's very angry, it's perceived more as a threat that you then in response want to show some sort of warm signals. However, from the literature in mimicry, this is what mostly people just mimic it with showing frowning and not smiling. But there are some papers that show that for people who are low on empathy, that they're more likely to smile in response to angry pictures. So it's quite complex what exactly is the reason for this smiling in response to frowning. But indeed, that's an interesting suggestion. I will definitely think about that a little bit more.
We probably should study even more action units.
Yeah, yeah, indeed.
Next question from Diamantus Petropoulos Petalas, who, by the way, will join the Hot Politics Lab half March as postdoc. Really looking forward to that. And he has a question. Thanks, Maaike. This is a great line of work. I wonder about the magnitude of difference in response for the left-wing politicians.
The difference in magnitude for the left-wing politicians.
Yeah.
So what we see is that there's when for the left-wing politicians, people smile a little bit more and frown less. So it's actually interesting to look into that a little bit more. The overall sample was quite left-wing because we used the student sample. So our overall results are mostly also based on left-wing politicians. So it's interesting to see. So it would suggest that in general, people are more happier when they see a left-wing politician. And the magnitude, so then it would be less mimicking, or there is no really that much mimicking. I think it would be more a positive response to their left-wing politician. Yeah, but this is something we didn't really expect to find a big result in this, and we saw this effect, and I think it's interesting to look more into this.
Yeah. Just for my own memory, I think did we control in that analysis for whether people saw the in party or the out party? I think.
What do you mean? Whether they saw?
People did not. It's not the case that people smiled more to the left-wing politicians on average, because on
No.
average, they are more likely to be the in-party, right? That's
Yeah.
what we controlled for
Yeah.
statistically. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So even when controlling for who your in-party is, we see more smiling with the left-wing politicians.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're equally ridiculous for left-wing and right-wing people.
Yeah.
And I think the effect size is something like 0.2 EMG, if I remember correctly, which I think is almost comparable to the treatment effects, but I might be wrong here.
Yeah. 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 It was both for the corrugator and for the zygomaticus. So yeah, both measures we find it.
Okay. I'm getting several questions now. First question from, I'm probably going to screw this up name-wise, Ozan Osgur Oktay. Is there any similar study from another culture? What would be the cultural effect?
Interesting. So most studies using emotion of politicians, I think were in Canada, the US. So not that much culturally different, so mostly just Caucasian politicians. But I think there might be some differences, especially if you look in emotion expression in different countries for politicians. In some countries, politicians show a lot more emotions than in other countries. And also it might differ, just how their face looks and maybe different skin tones. But there's not much evidence showing cultural differences so far. But I think it would be interesting to see, to compare to different countries, especially countries where emotions in politics is way higher compared to countries where there's much less emotion expressed by politicians, and see how they respond. Yeah.
More research to be done. There's a question from Qinyao Z. I assume this stands for Zhang, and then we have the who's going to be an intern at the Hot Politics Lab also next semester. I have a clarification question. Does the face app realistically adjust the face to the happy condition? I guess people might show fewer reactions if the image seems not so real. I remember you talk about the manipulation of angry faces is based on muscle movements, etc. But what about the happy face?
Yeah, very good question. I didn't have time to elaborate on it during the presentation, but we manipulated the action units of anger, but for happiness it was quite hard, because if someone smiles, you also see if they look neutral, and you try to manipulate a smile. In that programmed psychomorph, it would also show teeth, but then those teeth are very unrealistic because they're, well, fake. And in that filter with the face app, it really looks realistic. And so we pilot tested everything. So we asked just what emotion do you see in this face, or do you perceive? And almost 100% of those people all saw happiness. So that was happiness manipulation worked very, very well. And we had a question about just asking how genuine do you think this expression look? And there we also find very satisfying results. So overall, people found them quite believable and didn't see it as fake. So but also if you look at the pictures more closely, there that filter works really, really well. It's really quite creepy how well it works. But yeah. And also we used these pilot results to control also in our analysis, and we didn't find any significant effects of these pilot results on effects.
Okay, thanks then, Patrick Stewart again. How much dominance was signaled by these faces? For example, I can't pronounce this word, I think, physiognomy, baby faces for left-wing politicians, and knowledge of their power in the political structure.
So whether dominance actually matters, and based on their appearance, and also in the political structure, just in general. Well, dominance has in general a quite big effect if you look at other research in politics, especially with the looks. But here, yeah, we didn't, I was actually thinking of, might be interesting to also ask in this kind of pilot study, just facial appearances like dominance and attractiveness and competence, and see how that matters for mimicry. But we didn't do that here. Yeah, we looked whether there are big differences between politicians and also politicians that are more well known or maybe even more dominant, but we didn't really find that much big differences, only when we made these variables like male, left wing, etc. And also, I'm not sure who I would say would be really dominant politician in our, well, we could figure that out. But yeah, we didn't test it, but I think it would be interesting to see if more dominant faces would also be perceived maybe more angry and also maybe elicit then more corrugator activation. So yeah, definitely interesting, but we didn't control for it here.
To add to that, I think some of the faces were much easier to manipulate than others.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
this is, I think this is probably has to do with the dominance of their face.
Yeah. Yeah.
So was it Lodewijk Asscher, I think, the leader of the Labour Party? For him, it was almost impossible to make him look angry.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas for Tunahun Kusu, the leader of the Denk party, that's a Muslim party, for him, it's like his neutral face is already super angry.
Yeah,
because he has these very strong brows.
Yeah, it was mostly the eyebrows, because Usher in his picture his eyebrows were quite high and small, and it was very hard to make them look angry. Whereas with Kuhu was really easy. It was just only had to lower it a little bit, and it was super angry. But yeah, there are really these facial features which are closely related then to anger. So then it's also easier, and also maybe indeed related to dominance. Then yeah.
Okay, I have no more questions, and we're also out of time. So thanks a lot, Maaike. You'll get your Hot Politics lab mark. I think you already have one, right?
Yeah, I have one.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Bert, I'll give it to you.
So thank you, Maaike. It was great to see once more the Mimicry project being presented. It's a pleasure to also introduce you all to our second speaker, who is Can Zengin from Temple University. Can is a graduate student at the Department of Political Science, working with Finn Arsenault at the Behavioral Foundations Lab, a lab that we are closely collaborating with. And Can is doing really interesting work on the role of emotions in politics. And I think he will be sharing some of that today. Or am I wrong for the second time, Can?
No, you're right.
All right, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you so much. First of all, thanks for having me. And second, Maaike, that was a great presentation. Thank you for your research. So let me share my screen here. So I'm a grad student at Temple University, as Bert indicated. So this research is kind of in a way of cooking right now. So we don't have any results yet, but this is more theoretical. So just a caveat I wanted to mention in the beginning. So the story behind my project is like there are so many polarized societies, as my own country, Turkey, also the country I live in, the United States, and also polarization is everywhere. And there is this us versus them rhetoric, and affective polarization is a very interesting topic I really enjoy studying. As Iyengar said, like the growing trend of favoring the in-group while disliking and distrusting those from out groups. So the highlighted ones like favoring, disliking, distrusting, those are types of emotions that really brings attention. So then I asked myself a question like, why are we divided, and like how do our individual level emotions like aggregate to sharp societal divisions we see in the society? So when I looked at the literature, like the theories of motivated reasoning has a solution for like how group conflict shapes the out-group bias. For example, the cognitive dissonance. So it says like individuals develop negative feelings about out groups to justify themselves and to feel better about their in-group. But then I asked myself the second question, is a follow-up, like, are people always, like, do people always do that? Are people always motivated to reduce the cognitive dissonance by bringing the cognition, attitude, and behaviors in line with their identities? Like, is it always the case? And the answer, as I read in the literature, is no. So some people resolve the cognitive dissonance by accepting the blame instead of bringing with line with their identities. So here, my goal is to present like what explains the variance in this out-group bias. So as I mentioned, my project is basically affective polarization, but I believe in the heart it's about the out-group bias as well. And then all those emotions out there, this is from Marcus et al. Piece. So there are three basic types of emotions: circumstances caused, other caused, and self-caused. But while I was looking at the literature, including Hot Politics Lab and my own dissertation chair, everyone looks at the top two ones. Like, no one looks at the bottom ones. Like, what about the self-conscious emotions? No one, not no one, but like very few people look at self-conscious emotions. And most of the literature mentions about the anger and anxiety relationship in affective polarization. Like, while anger increasing the out-group bias, anxiety reduces the out-group bias. That's like the overall take from the literature. And in the self-conscious emotions part, there are a few studies mostly exploring the impact of American invasion of Iraq, and also shame and empathy by Simas et al. And Salmela. And then I dived into self-conscious emotions, like how do these emotions differ from others? And what I gathered that is that they are very important, because in the affective polarization, we mostly talk about the identity, and identity is the core of self-conscious emotions. For example, there is the self-awareness issue, that self-awareness and self-representation capacity to form the identity together. That's one feature of self-conscious emotions. And the second one, development takes time. It's not from birth. It develops in time, and most likely it matures by the end of third year in life. So it's not like fear, let's say, like fight or flight reaction, but it's a developing process, and it's at the end of third year most likely. And there is also the maintenance or enhancement of status or prevention of the group rejection. So there is this complex social goals between in and out groups. And there is the cognitive complexity, that evaluation of broader norms and assessment with high cognitive functions. So these were interesting to me. Fifth point is there is no non-universal expressions, we found out, but maybe Maaike in future can find out for me, because I don't know about this part. And the second importance of self-conscious emotions, the link to the identity aspect. So these emotions create the relationship between moral standards and the moral behavior, which is very important in out-group bias. And secondly, in the societies, which varies across cultures and countries, they provide a motivational force to understand what is right and what is wrong. So these are the importance of the self-conscious emotions. Here, I have a quick note from psychology. If any people, some people don't have the basic knowledge of this, so I highly, I want to mention about this, because in daily life, guilt and shame are very interchangeable. Everyone understands the same thing. But in psychology literature, the basic difference is, whereas guilt is the result of a reaction to a specific behavior, shame is ascribed to the actor's negative sense of identity. So guilt is more about the behavior, and the consequences is most likely to motivating to good consequence, like addressing the problem or remedy the problem. But on the other hand, shame doesn't give a stress-free environment. It's more about negative sense of identity and less likely to take any corrective action. And the other caveat is some part of the literature focuses on like shame on you, like people telling you to be ashamed. But what I'm talking self-conscious emotions about, like how I feel about my own actions, not the otherwise. So now here is my research question, like how do our individual level emotions aggregate to the affective polarization in politics and in daily life? This is the overarching question in my dissertation. So I argue that self-conscious emotions moderate the relationship between daily life interactions and the affective polarization. And here I focus on the proneness to the shame, guilt, and pride. As I mentioned, I look at the dispositional tendencies, like the traits as a moderator instead of emotion states itself, because it allows me to make inferences about the emotional states without having to measure them directly. And so my first hypothesis, this will be like the chapter 1 in my dissertation. Among guilt-prone individuals, there's a small association between information about the in-group transgression and the level of affective polarization. Versus among the shame-prone individuals, there is a huge association between information and the affective polarization. So how did I come up with this hypothesis? So in daily life, we always talk to each other, or we are on social media, or we watch YouTube videos, or any type of information we receive throughout the day. So these informations might include some transgressions caused by our own in-group towards the out-group. So we receive them all day long. So that creates a cognitive dissonance in our minds. And while we are assessing, my hypothesis among the shame-prone individuals, we assess it like, how could we do that? Or how could I do that? So something is wrong with us. And it's more self-oriented on perspective. And since we need to escape the cognitive dissonance, our reaction is most likely is the defensive, prone to blaming other people, and prone to anger and aggressive behavior. But on the other hand, among the guilt-prone individuals, the same mechanism goes into play like this. While we are assessing this information, how could we have done that, more focus on the behavior rather than the identity? And what we say is something is wrong with what we did instead of what with me or us. So it's more other-oriented and another person's perspective. So it's more emphatical. And the reaction is non-defensive, more amending behavior and addressing the problem, and more likely to manage the anger constructively and rationally discuss the situation. So I know some of you are more visual. We don't have the experiment yet, but this is what I expect. So as the information about the in-group transgression goes higher, for the shame-prone individuals, I expect affective polarization to be high, versus for the guilt-prone individuals, I expect a low association. So as I mentioned, there is no experiment. This is my hypothesis still. And in this dissertation, my second hypothesis is about the culture's role about the outcome of this shame emotion. So from shame-guilt debate, I directly focus on the shame part, like whether it leads to hide and retreat or leading to anger and aggression. And some of the literature mentions about the cross-cultural differences of shame emotion. In individualistic cultures, it's more me-oriented, and self-identity separates it from others and its individual standards and norms. Versus in the collectivist cultures, the self-identity cannot be separated from others and more interpersonal standards of norms. And the role of shame is in individualistic cultures, the literature says it doesn't mobilize to change. versus in collectivist cultures, it's more high valued, esteemed as an emotion, and hyper-cognized in the society. So this is this is in very early stage. I haven't done much about this hypothesis, but in my opinion, it still mobilizes the individualistic cultures as well, but with more anger and resentment. That leads to the third hypothesis. This is going to be the third chapter in my dissertation. So as we talked about shame's role, that cognitive dissonance and people need to get rid of this emotional distress, I argue that the populist movements, specifically right-wing nationalism, may help individuals to reduce the cognitive dissonance created by this ashamed feeling. So there are two parts of this hypothesis. I'm trying to make it more elaborate. So since we have the transgression of our in-group, then you feel ashamed of your identity. If you are in the majority group, then you might sympathize and empathize towards the victim group, which makes you join the existing populist movement and giving you pride and less cognitive dissonance. Versus if you are in the minority or victim group, feeling ashamed of your identity might result in rejecting the shame, finding pride in it, and joining the populist movement. So the first part, in the majority part, is sort of mentioned by Salmela 2019 paper. And the second part, what I gathered from the literature is the Decamisado movement from Argentina. It basically means the shirtless ones, and the Perón supporters took this took the phrase and then reject the shame and find pride in it, and then create their own movement, this Decamisado movement. So as I mentioned about the first part, that there is a Salmela's, and this is my notes about his argument. So basically, he mentions that shame is a master emotion, and contemporary neoliberal societies promote the feelings of insecurity, powerlessness, and worthlessness. And in the third part, he mentions the similar thing to my third hypothesis, like why do people support the right-wing political movements? So he says the first mechanism is the resentment, shame turning into the anger, resentment, and hatred. And the second mechanism is emotional distancing, like pushing the social identity away that induces shame, and finding comfort in nationality, ethnicity, religion, or language. So here, I agree with 2 points, but my contribution here is not necessarily only in neoliberal societies. We see this in other societies as well, and this emotional distancing is not the only thing. So I argue that pride as a conciliator emotion to reduce the cognitive dissonance. And our research design will take place like treatment group will take the proneness to self-conscious emotions test, and then there will be priming by videos, and then the last step is affective polarization level measures, and the control group will be a pure control. So for the moderator, we use the Tosca test. A shorter version of Tosca 3 is available, and we use this excluding the positive scenarios and just looking at the negative scenarios. One question in the Tosca test to measure the proneness is like this example. It looks at the shame, guilt, detachment, and externalization of the feeling. And for priming, we picked 3 categories: national ID, racial ID, and the partisan ID in the United States. So for the national ID, we look at the Iraqi invasion. Since most of the people in the literature looks at this, we wanted to do the experiment in the same way just to see the comparison. For the racial ID, we mostly focus on whites, but we might change the video here, so we might focus on the civil rights movement as well. And for Democrats and Republicans, the transgression here is the corruption scandal in a top level politician in the parties. And we also did a pilot study.
John,
here
you think you should round up, because otherwise we have no time for questions.
Okay. So we did the pilot study, and based on the pilot study results, we didn't have much significant results across the videos. So we are just gonna pick one out of two. And for the affective polarization, we use the social distance and trust measures. And here is the example for that. And thanks for listening. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thanks,
John. A lot to digest. A whole dissertation project in 15 minutes. It sounds very exciting. So again, for all the participants, you can type your questions into the Q&A box, and I will read them out. While I wait for the first question to come, I'll take the liberty to ask a question myself. So I was wondering whether people who are likely to feel guilt or shame, are they equal, or are they not already polarized at a different level? Or can we see these two things independently from each other?
I do not know the exact answer to that, but these proneness can vary across individuals and within individuals as well. And what I read about the psychology literature is the proneness can change as well. It's not just predisposed and the same level for the same individual. So it can be reduced or increased based on the information and the techniques.
Okay. Okay, question from Mark Brandt. Thanks for the presentation. I'm curious if there's evidence that trait shame and guilt can be a proxy for state shame and guilt. I'm personally surprised that you can cash this out.
Yeah, there are a couple of studies which specifically focuses on like individual level of shame and also the collective levels of shame. And some of the collective level studies looks at, let's say, in the German case, looking at the Nazi Germany as the collective shame emotion. Some other ones I remember. I think there was one Dutch study as well about the East Asia but yeah, there are like two types of research there. Like one looks at the individual level and the other one looks at the collective level. But it might be interesting to look at like the state level as well.
Okay. Bert, do you have a question?
Yeah, kind of related question to Mark. Because how I understand Mark's question is so you do a test of sort of dispositional proneness to experience guilt, and you use that as a moderator of these treatment effects, which suggests that the people that are higher on this guilt proneness scale have a higher proclivity of also sort of getting in a sort of proxy state. They should get in a state of guilt, right? And I'm curious, is there evidence for that these people that are guilt prone, are they indeed the ones that in this experiment are also gonna experience that state level emotion that you suggest? Because you're now making sort of a mechanism claim based on an individual difference.
Can I get the question once again, please?
So the question is what's the evidence that the individual difference of of trait proneness into guilt translate into state guilt?
Yeah, there are a couple of studies confirming that from like in both predispositions and also emotional states, it gives the same results.
If I would give a suggestion, I would pilot test that to see if that indeed also that you get higher levels of the emotion that you're interested in among these people higher on the trait guilt proneness, just to show that you're getting the mechanism and that there are not other things related to the individual difference that explain that moderation effect that you anticipate.
Yeah. Like as a follow-up study, I'm also thinking about a lab experiment to measure the emotional state as well. But right now it's kind of hectic times, as you can imagine, and right now we are going with the predispositions just to see the initial results.
Okay. There's
Oh yeah.
Sorry, there's a couple of questions, Bert.
Oh, sorry, I'll shut up.
There's a question from Patrick Stewart. Do you think that there is a congruence of guilt to shame as pride to hubris? For example, is pride a fleeting emotion similar to guilt, whereas shame and hubris are longer lasting? In other words, is there a cycling of emotional response?
So I will link these two parts based on the shame and pride relationship, because pride also has two types. Like one type is hubristic pride, and the second one is authentic pride. So what he says is already tied in the pride, and hubristic pride is more related to shame versus the authentic pride is more related to guilt there.
Okay, that's clear. Then a question from Ozan Osgur Oktay, who says something in Turkish, I assume. Thank you, John. Will you consider the socioeconomic status of people about polarization?
Yes, I'm planning to consider the Salmela piece I mentioned. He basically looks from the economical terms. Actually, I would like to see that as well, but my main motivation is looking at more identity aspect rather than the sociocultural aspect, because yes, like affective polarization has the socioeconomic basis as well, but like what I'm most interested is more like us versus them in the identity sense, like let's say left versus right, Democrat versus Republican, or in the Turkey sense, like AKP versus CHP, or like liberal versus conservative mindset. So, but yes, that's a good idea to consider socioeconomic effects as well.
Okay, there's a question from Nasser. Have you looked at guilt and shame from a different perspective than psychology, like the mentioning of guilt and shame in religious books and other fields?
Mm-hmm. I haven't considered looking from the religious one aspect, but I believe religion is already embedded into those identities that I just mentioned. So I guess that kind of overlaps there.
Okay. Bert, you want to finish your earlier question?
Yes, only if you allow me. So John, can you say a little bit about what you anticipate in terms of effect sizes and sort of sample sizes needed to then detect these effect sizes?
Overall, we are planning to look at like something around like 2,500 people as a sample, and probably the sample will be split into 3 groups, as I mentioned, like national ID, racial ID, and the partisan ID. And in the pilot study, we had something like 450 people overall, but for the main experiment, we are expecting something around 2,500 overall people.
Yes, I would. Yeah, I would also have some estimates of treatment effects for you, and maybe you can ask some other people as well, or Finn can do this, because my experience with these priming tasks is that these effects are tiny, so you really need to come with like a big hammer in terms of observations to knock it out. And it would be a bit of, if I would advise you, would be if you're underpowered and not find it, then you might actually have a really good idea that you were not just able to detect so that I would pay attention to.
What would be your suggestion about the sample size then?
I would do a power calculation, but I would anticipate a very, very small effect size. Like the samples we did via Flokus and Ari Malka, we had these numbers are a little higher, and it was not, the effect size are small. So that's just that. I would start with that.
Okay. No, thank you for the advice.
There are 2 more suggestions, and then we have to round up. First suggestion by Patrick Stewart, and he says, consider postural changes to prime responses for guilt and pride, or as a measure of response. E.g., consider app et al., as in APP, et al's work on posture. Okay, that would be. I would also be interested in getting that citation, Patrick. And another suggestion from me. The mechanisms you're describing, it made me think a lot about the social movement work on emotions. And I'm not, I don't know if you've looked at that yet, but if you haven't, like the work by Jasper and a whole bunch of other people in that area could be really helpful. And there's a very good annual review of sociology, I think, summary paper by Jasper himself on this topic. So
yeah.
Okay, Bert, do you want to round it up?
Yes, thanks, guys. So thanks, Mike and John, for 2 excellent presentations. Thanks for those of you in the audience for the engaging questions and comments. This is it for the normal Hot Politics meetings that were online in 2020, and that will continue online in 2021. Because those of you who are in the Netherlands know we're in a good 3rd wave or 2nd wave and in full lockdown, and there's no chance that we will be in a university building anytime soon. Gijs and I did record a little surprise overview podcast for you, where we reflect a little bit upon what we learned in these online Hot Politics sessions up to this point. That will be online probably somewhere next week. So if you miss us during the Christmas break, you still have like an hour to listen to our warm voices. Then on January 8th, we continue with my former colleague and good friend Jif Lelkes from the University of Pennsylvania. We have Ursula Dexeker, and the week afterwards, and a whole bunch of excellent speakers lined up for you on the website, which include and are not limited to people like Tristan Klingelhofer, a PhD student from Johns Hopkins, who will come and present on Graduate Friday, my former student at ASCOR, Andrea Fick, who's now a PhD student at the University of Oslo in Norway. So check out our website, tune in from 3 to 4, or listen to us on your favorite podcast device. I will say this wrapping up, that I want to thank you all for the participation. The move to an online lab has been fun, but it's only fun also because it seems that there is a audience for this, in the sense that people find it interesting to come and listen and contribute and or present. So we hope that we can continue this in 2021. And in the meantime, most of all, I hope all of you will take the time to unwind a little bit, close down your computer, not talk too much to a screen, but maybe to your wife, partner, or friend, and or husband, obviously, take some time to relax during the Christmas break. And we look forward to seeing you again January 8th.